Hello, welcome everyone joining us. You can see everyone coming in from the waiting room now. Welcome, welcome. Okay, so hopefully everyone can hear okay. A warm welcome to all the RSM alumni joining us. Thank you so much. We're going to have a great session here today where we're exploring how to create impact through your career. So hello, my name's Erica Walk. I'm an Alumni Relations Manager at Rotterdam School of Management. Today's session is the third in RSM's Alumni Career Days, which is designed to provide career support to our alumni community with a full month of online and in-person discussions, masterclasses, careers advice and networking. There are still some tickets available to our upcoming sessions, so I'll share more information about those at the end. Before we get started, I just need to let you know that this session is being recorded, and after some editing, it will be shared in late June time with all other materials from the career days. So on to today's topic. This session is for anyone who's seeking more than just professional success. We're here today because we want to make meaningful contributions to society and to drive positive change in our communities and beyond. Our panelists are going to explore the principles of purpose-driven work, social responsibility, and sustainable practices. And we're going to be asking them for inspiration and actionable strategies on how to align your career with your values and aspirations. They'll be offering advice and tools and the mindset needed to pursue an impactful career that leaves a lasting legacy. We have three great panelists here to share their advice. And in addition to our moderators' questions, they really welcome your questions too. So if you have anything you'd like to ask throughout the session, then please pop questions in the chat box or use the virtual raise your hand function so that you can ask the questions as we go. And there'll also be time for audience Q&A later in the session too. So I'll hand over now to my colleague Meta, who's moderating the session, and to introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Erica. And welcome again in my name to everyone in the audience and to our three amazing panelists that we found through our alumni network and beyond. And I'm really happy to introduce you, Jacqueline, Hari, and Alba. And I won't be saying a lot of things about them myself. I would like to introduce them. I would like to ask them to introduce themselves directly to you. And also at the same time, I would really like to ask them already, what does the idea of creating impact in their career mean to them personally? So, Jacqueline, would you like to start?
Sounds good. And hello, everyone from my side. I am Jacqueline, but usually people tend to call me JJ, so feel free to do so. I am based in Düsseldorf, and I did both my bachelor as well as my master's studies at RSM. And RSM is very dear to me, so very happy to be with you today. And I would say by nature, I am a strategist, and I have a project track record across mainly Europe, but also had the chance to work within the US and Asia contexts in different industries, with my current employer mainly in life science, and I've also touched energy. That was both during corporation and external consulting. And at my current employer, which is Bayer, so the big pharmaceutical and agriculture company, I was involved and am involved in large global scale transformation programs with different like-minded colleagues that aim to bring the company closer to being net positive. We will touch upon that later on in the session. And to answer your question, Meta, what does it mean creating impact for me? Essentially is I want to be happy at the end of the day with myself. I want to work in a field that aligns with my values. And in my case, that actually means working within large corporations because of their magnitude in industries that I believe in. And why I chose Bayer, it's because I believe in the mission of bringing health and nutrition to people. That is for me very tangible. And the projects that I've done or I came to do throughout these past 4 years with the company have really helped me get that clarity for myself and be happy with myself. So to keep it short, I don't have all the answers. I'm trying to support from my experience as much as possible and together hopefully have a meaningful session to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this lovely introduction. Hari.
Hi, nice meeting you. So my name is Harry Oosting. I'm currently working at WWF as Director of Program Quality for Europe and North Africa, but I actually have a long sort of trajectory behind me, which I started somewhere in Latin America where I was working with local organizations, particularly around poverty reduction. I think what was impacted at that stage for me was reducing poverty, helping poor people. I think that gradually evolved in working on giving people a voice, so they can decide on the future and on key policies that would impact their life, to, let's say, working with Oxfam on systematic change, and now at WWF on a number of agendas. And so we engage a lot with the Paris Agreement to work on the global biodiversity framework, but also sustainable development goals. So very broad framework. And what we actually trying to do, because we have all these frameworks, is actually give them hands and feet, and to make them concrete. So it's a bit of a trajectory. What I actually want to say is that what impact is for me has evolved over time. I think what society has defined as impact, as social impact, has changed, from human rights frameworks to Paris agreements, etc. But also personally for me, I think it has evolved on what I found important. And I think that's something that will happen to all of us. Right? It's a continuous sort of exploration of thinking, okay, what is important and how can I make an impact on my on the world around me. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Harry. Alba.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Similar to JJ, I'm a graduate of the Strategic Management Master. And my journey at RSM in the business school led me to explore cross-sector partnerships. So for my thesis, I wanted to understand how do businesses and nonprofits work together to create value. And that led me to my first job at DSM, where I was the public-private partnership manager for the relationships that the company had with UNICEF and the World Food Programme on malnutrition. So that was an amazing first experience. And afterwards, I moved to Centriant Pharmaceuticals, which was DSM's former pharmaceutical business in antibiotics. And I was there the sustainability director and also working on different public affairs topics. As of last year, I've left the firm and I've struck out on my own as an independent advisor to companies and organizations on topics related to sustainability and public affairs. Having impact for me, creating impact for me is about being able to leave, a role or a project, knowing that you've left something behind that can stay, that is sustainable, beyond just yourself as a person. So that to me is what I look to do, and then move on to tackle another issue.
Thank you so much for these lovely introductions, and immediately jump into the topic that we'll be discussing later in today. I really like how we are all bringing different perspectives, and I think we'll make a really great conversation. So to start immediately with a very concrete question, have you encountered conflicts between your personal values, your professional aspirations, and the practices of the industry or the company organization you've worked in? And do you have any advice how to navigate this? Who would like to start?
I'm happy to start. I'm happy to say something. So
Yes.
Maybe you would guess. So I spent my life working in NGOs, right? So I guess that is a kind of how to say that, place where I haven't really had this conflict about internally about having to do things that are against my principles or feeling tension on that. But having said that, I'm very much aware if we want to make an impact on our life, it is not sufficient to stay in this bubble. So actually, I'm calling in from a WF meeting where we are discussing corporate partnerships. So we are, in the last couple of days, we've been talking about partnership we have with H&M, with Lidl, for instance, with Coca-Cola, with even beef sector in Brazil, companies which you might not immediately link to WF automatically, but it is necessary to work with these companies to make sustainable change, to make an impact at scale. And exactly that does mean that sometimes you're working with companies which are maybe outside of your comfort zone, or at least for me as an NGO person, where you see things which is not immediately on a level you would like to have. But the conversation about how to make this transformation, how to make businesses more transformational, how can they, take these targets we've been discussing at the heart of their businesses. So that's sometimes uncomfortable, right? But I think we need to have this conversation, and it's important that we step out of our, in my case, out of our NGO bubble, and step into business world to make these changes that we need.
Maybe if I may add on a different perspective from Harry, from the more corporate/consulting side of things, right? And also, if you're just beginning in your career, you don't always get to work on the topics that you particularly are most passionate about, right? It's a process. So I would say, from the nature of consulting, as you probably all know, traditionally projects mainly come as client requests, right, from the organization, and especially in the model of in-house consulting, that's typically the case. And when I joined, I found myself as a young consultant, right, put on large restructuring programs. And I have to say, they really built my consulting toolkit. Of course, it helps a lot, right, with things like stakeholder management. But I wouldn't say that doing org chart restructurings is fully aligned with what I wanted to do in life, right? So at some point, you want to change that focus. And what we did, we took a step back as a consulting team, right, together with my managers as well. And we said, what type of projects do we want to do? What type of value do we want to leave behind, right, the legacy? And we set sustainability as an area we want to strengthen. So therefore, we defined the areas within sustainability that we think make sense, and then proactively build a portfolio of projects that then I was lucky enough to lead and be part of. So what I'm trying to say with this is I managed to change my trajectory a little bit by being proactive. Otherwise, I would have done probably restructurings my whole tenure. Just a bit of a different perspective.
Maybe to add to what JJ is saying, I think that's a really smart approach to build those skills up and then be able to use them later in your toolkit. I think it's also important to be very aware of your values, because ultimately not every organization can match your values. And so at a certain point, after you've tried your best, you've tried different types of language, you've tried different types of approaches, it's also important to be true to yourself and be able to walk away from a situation where you can see you're not adding value, or where you can see that your values are not aligned. I think that also takes a lot of strength, and it's not a failure, but to just accept that I've done what I can here and our values just don't align. And there are so many issues in this world to be tackled that sometimes it's time to move on.
Okay. Thank you. And this kind of leads very well to my next question I had, and then we've already tapped a little bit into it. It's really nice to hear that how it works in theory, but how do you kind of do this in practice? What kind of advice would you give to somebody who is looking to really make more purpose or in their careers or make more impact? How to start that in their professional journey?
Perhaps here I can give it a go, but please, colleagues, build in. So I would say 3 things, right? First, it's important to find a niche, because as much as we wish, we are not going to be able to save the entire world. So find topics that you're passionate about, that drive you, right? Where you can also make an impact at the stage where you are in as well. And then try to really engage in those topics more. Second, I would say be authentic, but you could also say just be bold, because I see way too many people starting their career thinking in hierarchies, thinking I'm just a starting consultant, or I'm just starting. Why can, my manager needs to approve this, or they need to do that. And I think it's so important to not leave hierarchies stop you from sharing your mind, because some of the great ideas can come when you actually speak up. So I would say be bold and speak up. What's the worst that can happen? You can get a no. And that brings me to my third point, which is don't be afraid of the no's, because if I tell you how many doors I got closed, how many no's I got, if that stopped me, I would have not done any project. And I think this is part of being a change maker, especially the more radical change you want to make, the more no's you will get and the less people you will have on board at the beginning. So be comfortable with no and persevere. That's my 2 cents. What about you guys?
Maybe I can follow up on that. I think it's really important that people educate themselves on what it is to have impact and exactly what kind of impact they want to make, because there's a lot of greenwashing out there. And every company's website is going to tell you how they're mission-driven and purpose-led. And you need to be able to see through that and ask the right questions. And I think that young people have an advantage to kind of be more savvy and skeptical. Maybe when it comes to reading these kinds of website PR approaches, more so than older people. Because I would be sometimes, giving sustainability talks in our internal town halls, and people would be really happy to receive the information, but they would ask me no critical questions at all. They were just happy. They would say, "This is great. What we're doing is great." And I needed more critical questions because that would help me do my job better. That would help me push things forward. So I think it's really important to be critical when you're looking at an organization's website. ESG ratings give you very little information, right? So it's really to be aware and to be savvy who's having an impact and how can I, align myself with them. I think it's also really important to think about what your trade-offs are. So you might want to work for an NGO or a social enterprise, which have a great social mission, but that's a trade-off maybe in terms of financial benefits, for example. You might want to work for a big corporate that has a lot of training and development opportunities, but maybe doesn't have right away, a clear path to a social impact. So I think it's really important to question within yourself what it is that's most important for you at this stage, and that can guide you.
Thanks, Alba. I think it's really interesting, and it links quite well with some of my experiences. So I think in the decisions I've made in my career, I always try to do, I think there's 3 parameters I'm always looking at. So one is impact, and so make an impact on the world. And I already said in my introduction, actually how I define impact or how we define impact, society evolves, right? So it changes all the time. And I think it's important to sort of question yourself, is this really about the kind of change I'm looking for? I think that's one thing. So in my position, do I work or just in greener work? Second aspect is that I, as a professional, want to make it. I don't want to, so I want to be a professional. I want to make sure that in my career, I make a difference with the talents I have and education I have, I make a difference the best as I can. So it doesn't make sense for me to, work on poverty in an African country, for instance, because I think my talents are best suited in another place. So and it's also a search. Yeah? So what is the place where I can make a difference? And I think a third one is I always call it enjoy. So to feel good about what you're doing. But I think it's a bit about, feeling meaningful. It's about feeling you're in a place. Maybe it's a combination of the other 2 criteria I mentioned. And I think what Alba also said, it's being sort of true to yourself. Am I on the right spot? Am I doing the right thing? And it doesn't mean that I've changed, although I haven't worked for so many companies in my life, I've changed a lot of positions, always trying to find. And so I think this is a constant search. And it does mean, like Alba said, to make mistakes. So, I've been involved on, for instance, a roundtable on sustainable palm oil. Well, I'm convinced now that sustainable palm oil doesn't exist, right? But there were attempts. Some work out well, some you fail. And I think what is sort of the key lesson in all this is be true to yourself, but also be brave. And so if you are, I guess my impression, if you work on a Rotterdam School of Management, everybody's aspiring to become a manager. And sometimes maybe the most inspiring thing is not being a manager, is being a policy advisor on a specific issue, or working in an NGO, or working with a grassroots organization. Maybe that's also where you're very talented for. So be brave and to search for those opportunities and challenges that can fulfill you.
Thank you so much to all 3 of you for these amazing answers. I also got inspired. But Harry, I have a follow-up questions for you. As you mentioned, of course, we are here with the community of Rotterdam School of Management graduates and some current students. And while it's true that traditionally our graduates went into more kind of corporate roles, it's not necessarily the case anymore. However, of course, still a big majority of them, they do kind of at least start in some kind of big companies and kind of different style of organization that you work in at the moment. Do you have any advice or any kind of concrete example for our graduates in case they would like to make a switch from a, corporate into NGO? How can they best show their value coming from management experience and education?
So let me start by saying, if you want to make an impact, you don't have to work in NGO, right? So like I said, I'm in the corporate engagement meeting here, and we're talking about companies that are willing to do so. I do agree with Albert, there's a lot of greenwashing, so a lot of companies that have it on paper but not in reality. But there are also companies that are having sustainability teams and they're trying to transform the way they do business. But anyway, I'm working for an NGO, which is actually playing, I think, an important role to work with these companies to negotiate. I think people that have maybe the idea to work there, I think first important step to realize is that there are many different kinds of NGOs. So I'm working at WWF, which is a kind of, you could say, a multinational, right? We work in 100 countries, there are 8,000 employees. It is a very sort of professional and professionalized organization. And it means that we have a lot of staff which does have a marketing background, we just have a management background, who are communication experts. And it is because it is really a professional organization, and you want to have the best people to make an impact. So I definitely think that people that work for that study at the Royal School of Environment, there is a place to do that. But also in the corporate sector, in the NGO world, you have other kinds of NGOs. You have more activist NGOs. You have NGOs that work on sort of innovations to change specific things, or monitoring impact or changing ways of doing business. So I think it's really good to see. You would, probably look at a company, you also would have an idea, do I want to work at a multinational or do I want to work at a startup? I think the same with looking at an NGO, what kind of NGO suits me. I think that's one thing. I think another piece that I would like to give, if you apply for an NGO, my experience is, and I've been sitting in a lot of sort of selection committees where people apply. What is generally quite important is that NGOs find it very important where your principles are and where your convictions lie. Actually, the first part of the interview, my experience is around that. Then you talk about your experience and your skills, and then you talk about your personal competencies. But I think there is, in general terms, a strong emphasis on, let's say, the values that you bring, and if they match the organization you're applying for. And I think it's important to think about that. If you apply, why do I apply for this organization, and what role can I play? So I hope that helps a bit. And of course, I want to say, we need people also with management education in NGOs. So please don't feel that do consider it as an option for your career.
Thank you. And it was really nice to hear just really concrete experience and advice. And I'm sure many of our graduates can really consider that as well. Good. But a question that kind of refers to this one for both JJ and Alba. So as we've already mentioned, some companies, most of the companies nowadays have really clearly stated how they're mission driven and so on. And yes, some of them, they're more serious about it. Some of them are less serious about it. But once you're already working for a company and you want to do impact, so how concretely can you go about identifying these issues that needs to be changed or challenges? And how can you align that with company's mission? Like, to who do you go to talk about? How do you really concretely do the right steps? So, JJ.
Yes, no, happy to start. And I think first I would like to give the typical consulting answer of it depends, because it depends a lot on the size of the company, right? It's one thing to talk about a mid-sized company, and then when you start talking about large organizations with several divisions, there's so many challenges, right? That are so different per division itself. So let me start by saying I think it's important to narrow it down a little bit and prioritize what you want to focus on. And for that topic, really do your research, because I see so much right now, right? We have forces coming from externally, not only regulations, right? Pushing companies left and right, especially if you think about Europe specific. We have the geopolitical situation, which is super unstable, which can change strategic trajectory from today to tomorrow. You have so many of such forces, which means that I think it's very important, and maybe that sounds very naive, but I really believe it, to read the news, keep really up to date with what's going on, and then find a few hypotheses to test. To give you a very precise example on that one. So one of the divisions of Bayer, right, it's the OTC, so the over-the-counter medicine. And you know, regulations such as packaging, right, that has to be more sustainable, things coming from the EU taxonomy with biodegradability of drugs. There's so many, let's say, forces that influence the strategic trajectory of this division. And in some countries, it's more than others. So there are countries that implement those regulations so strictly to the point to which you can actually lose business if you don't comply with certain standards, right? If you don't read the news in advance, if you're not aware, this can happen. And it happened now for certain companies. And this is why I'm saying it's important to find a few hypotheses. And then coming to your question, Meta, on who do you talk to, then find the right stakeholders inside, which from my lens of strategy, I was quite fortunate because, of course, I had access to the stakeholders at the higher level, which means you could directly at least test those. But I would say a starting point is the person that is the closest to the topic. So for example, if the tender is in the UK, I would try to find a connection by talking to different people to the person that could basically test that in the UK, in such an example, right? And that could be as simple as cold calling. If you're in a luxury position to do that, I really think, at least with the culture at Bayer, I could always cold call someone and they would pick up. But you could also leverage in-house associations. So corporations usually have different groups. For example, we had sustainability champions or one Bayer communities, which basically means there's certain groups of people coming together and working on certain issues, and you can reach out to those people and usually they can help or connect you. So it's all networking at the end of the day in-house. To find the right person is not easy. I talked a lot, hope that helps, but that's my 2 cents. What about you, Alba?
Indeed. So just to build on what JJ said, is I would first check what are the existing networks within the company. So most companies at this point will have a DEI network or some variant of that. They'll have perhaps a young professionals network if they're a big enough company, a community action event annually, perhaps. So to get involved in those types of existing networks and see where you can add value. And if they don't satisfy you, if you have further ideas, then to go to indeed the people who are responsible for these topics, whether that sits in the HR community or the sustainability community or directly with the CEO, is to just approach them with your ideas. I was always very grateful if people would come to me and, offer to help on a sustainability project, who doesn't want an extra set of hands. So that could be a way to gain experience and have impact, even while you're still doing your normal job.
Great, and this is really amazing to hear about networks. Do you also have some examples of kind of cross-industry networks that can be beneficial for this kind of purpose? So not just within your organization, but also within other similar organizations.
Sure. So maybe I can mention a couple of networks that have been very valuable to me. I would say in terms of an offline network, so an in-person network, I was part of the World Economic Forum Global Shapers, which is a group of up to, I think, 33 years of age, young people in the Netherlands. And these were people who had a medical background, business background, NGO background. So quite a varied group of, let's say, change makers, if you will, but people who are very passionate about this. And this is not the only network of its kind, but there are many networks that are either based in the Netherlands or internationally that you can really get in contact with very bright, interesting, like-minded people. And I would also mention that LinkedIn is a powerful network in terms of online networks. You can follow people with, completely different backgrounds and new ideas. And so I find myself really learning a lot from other people on LinkedIn. And not just people who brand themselves as thought leaders and just post kind of random chat GPT kind of, content, but really people who are deep thinkers in specific areas. And I just find myself getting a lot of energy and information from some people.
Great. So a lot is really just up to you, and just go out and about, find like-minded people. JJ, Hari, do you have any examples of good suggestions on this topic? So kind of networks within your company, organization, or beyond?
No, definitely. It's a lot, as Alba mentioned. So within a company, for sure, there are several networks that usually get formed on a topic, right? So you can have a sustainability network, a digital network, and usually people are very happy to help and then build those, let's say, separate chat platforms so that you can exchange ideas and so on. So that's always, the larger the company, the more networks you have, right? But externally, at least some that I've experienced and also collaborated with, including associations like the Value Balancing Alliance. I'm not sure if anyone has heard in this round. It's quite a big association, right? That also is quite advanced when it comes to how they define a net positive, how they do impact valuation topics as such, but also platforms such as in-house consulting networks. So for example, in Germany, most big corporations actually have an in-house consultancy, and those in-house consultancies then have a network where they exchange amongst each other. So for example, with Bayer, we were leading mainly the sustainability exchanges, and that's actually one of the many platforms that we used when we created a paper. Happy to talk about it if that's of interest. I think, Meta, you put it also on the website a bit, where essentially this paper was co-created by a lot of different networks, right? And so I think that is just about being proactive and finding them. There's also, of course, different events. So depending on the industry, that's more industry networks, right? You have different events and conferences you can join, right? So for example, in Berlin, there's often all sorts of events happening all the time. So I think that is just about leveraging LinkedIn, like Alba said, for the online communities. I think that's also the most accessible, but also putting the right newsletter pop-ups so you hear about these events and then joining them. Some will be cost-free, some will be more pricey, but there always are. So.
But JJ, we would really love to hear a little bit more about this paper, because if we can really kind of add value to understand more about the impact you made, the work you have done, and how you can work together with various organizations to really make impact and change. Can you share a little bit about it?
Sure, happy to. So let me try to keep it short because I tend to talk for hours about this. So I'll keep it short, and you can ask also for the audience more questions if you're interested. So essentially what it was at the beginning, right? So it was a co-creation effort with several stakeholders within Bayer, so including several C-level executives, but also external specialist firms, external consultancies, and professional associations like the Value Balancing Alliance or the in-house consulting network. And we even engaged students from Rotterdam. So we even talked with RSM in creating this paper. It was a huge effort. Why did we do that? That's because we see companies such as Bayer, right, that set ambitious targets, ambitious strategies, right? And they are going step by step towards becoming a sustainable company. But we think that the pace of advancement could be even more accelerated if you exchange ideas between, and you basically find ways that transition can be speedier and more effective to become net positive. So we wanted to see, can we speed it up? Can we make it better? And can we make it more bold, right? And for that, there's a lot of learnings that we had within the paper, so happy to share some. But essentially, the critical part is that we said you need to find a pathway, right? So you need to derive a transition plan, and then afterwards navigate along this pathway to enhance the company's steering model and ultimately culture. And for that, we started with a country pilot, but also with a business pilot. So for the business pilot, I was happy to lead the first business pilot within pharma, where essentially we said, how can we translate the overall company vision that you probably see everywhere in the news, so that every business unit, right, every function can then contribute tangibly to that, so that it becomes a bit less greeny-washy, in a sense that maybe a business in agriculture has a different impact than a business in pharma, right? It's different kinds. And for that, we used a lot of frameworks such as the CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, to give one example of a framework I'm personally very passionate about, where we basically looked what is really the most tangible impact and then derive KPIs and everything from there. So I'll stop here, but the paper in summary, and happy that you if you want to read it, it's basically outlining what can you do step by step to become net positive as a large corporation. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And now again, kind of an appeal to the audience. If you have, of course, feel free. I think you have access to this document. The link is on the bio page of this event. But as well, if you have any concrete questions and so on, just throw them in the chat or raise your hand. But just to let you know, for the next like half an hour, we still have time. Anyway, but I will continue with my questions because I'm also very curious. Alba, so yeah, you also have an extensive experience in various organizations, and would you like to share how did you approach the stakeholder engagement to ensure buy-in, and how did you get support for sustainability initiatives, and what kind of strategies worked most? And yeah, there were some things that we've already touched upon, but I'm really curious in detail and really practically if you have any good advice for us.
Sure. So internally, I've found that you really need to make the case for sustainability and stakeholder engagement by linking it to the business case and to the core business of the company. I think that if you don't do that, you're unlikely to be successful, and you're probably doing philanthropy at best. And that means, when times get tough and the budgets are slimmed down, your initiative is very much at risk. So really weaving it into the core business of the company, I think is a key ingredient for success. In addition to that, or if that's not possible, I would say to link it as much as possible to other kind of core functions of the company. So for instance, attraction of talent or retaining talent and making a case around that, or the corporate reputation angle. But whatever it is you do, I think in order to sell your program and really have it embedded internally with your stakeholders, you really need to make it, let's say, worthwhile, and you really need to be able to have a strong value proposition for success.
Can I maybe react to that, Meta? So I really agree. So we have a lot of conversation with companies on, that we want to collaborate with, or they want to collaborate with the World Wildlife Fund. And so we are less interested in actually having resources for another pet project to protect a lion or a bear or what you have, a gazelle. I think the first part we talk about with the company is exactly what Alba is mentioning. So how do you make a transformation of your core business? And that is what it's about. That is the level.
Sorry, Harry, there is something with your microphone. Yeah, we didn't hear the last part that you were.
Oh, sorry. Let me move it a bit. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So what I was saying, when we start a conversation with a company, it is about transforming their core business. I think that is the way you can achieve impact and make a difference. And then later on, we can talk about, let's say, specific projects in specific landscapes. But I think the main issue with companies is about how to link, impact with their core business to achieve impact. So reacting to what Alba was saying.
Harry, do you encounter this a lot, that a lot of companies, corporates come to you?
Yeah, all the time.
And seek partnership, but with kind of motives that are not always good.
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. And and WF is a brand, has a very strong brand, has a lot of credibility. So yes, companies want to be associated with WWF, and they want to have, and I think particularly in like it's a bit less when you're in the Netherlands or in Denmark and Sweden. I think their sort of the ESG policies are much more already, incorporated in businesses. But particularly if you work in like Bulgaria, Romania, Slovenia, but also Africa, they see it more as a marketing issue, right? They give you 10,000 euro, and then they can associate themselves with the panda logo, which is of course nice. So we don't want to do that anymore. So maybe we've done it in the past. We don't want to do it anymore. So the first part of the conversation is about how do you change core business. Then the second stage is how do you bring that into the whole value chain? How do you work with your consumers on education? How do you translate it into the policies towards your own workers? And only then we can talk about funding specific projects for bears, etc. So it's really about changing core businesses. And it also brings me back to another point I made before. So if you want to make a difference in your career, yes, you can choose to work for an NGO to push these companies in that direction. And you can opt actually to work within an organization and try to find, other colleagues that think similarly and try to make that change. I think that both sides of a sort of similar coin. And I think if we really want to achieve these big objectives and address these big challenges, we need to find each other in making those changes.
Good, thank you. This was very kind of insightful, because I think we often just see one side. Oh, this company is associated with a good charity or good NGO, but it's very good to also hear the other side, the back side of the story. I now have another question that's a bit subjective and comes back to JJ mentioning we need to read the news. But still, I am curious about your opinion about what are the most pressing social and environmental challenges that, today's professionals should be aware of. I would really love to hear your insight. So who would like to start?
Yeah, I mean, there may be so many issues. So I mentioned in the beginning what I'm really working on, but it's also a WF mission is a number of. I think one of the big crises you have is on climate and climate change, the huge impact it has on livelihoods, the huge impact it has on our lives, the risk we are facing in the future. So I think that's a huge one, and I think we don't have to discuss it a lot. I think most of us agree on that. I think another one, which is maybe less commonly known, is, let's say, the biodiversity crisis. We have we are doing reports, and we have seen that there is a 69% of loss in biodiversity on a global scale, which is a huge crisis. And actually, biodiversity are sort of the building blocks of life, and so we need biodiversity to develop new seed varieties for crops that are resistant to climate change. We need forests to capture carbon dioxide. So the biodiversity crisis is a crisis. It's very much linked to the climate crisis and other crises, which is the one that is striking us hard. And I think a third one that's linked to sustainable development framework. I think we still see a lot of poverty and inequality in the world, something that maybe is less on the political agenda these days, but which is still a crisis facing a lot of countries. Even if countries like traditional countries like India or Vietnam, what you have, that used to be very low income countries, they are becoming middle income countries, even high middle income countries. Still, the level of poverty is very high because inequality is so high. And I think that's another issue we need to address. So just throwing three huge agendas on the table, which I think is really important.
So I fully agree with Harry. I think climate change, biodiversity, income inequality, these are some of very, very pressing topics for managers nowadays, right? Regardless where you are. And I would also add further, and this is why I said earlier, I'm a big framework of the CSRD framework. So I just kind of encourage you to at least be aware of it, because it outlines other issues as well. So for example, you have on the E, right? So ESG. So on the E side, environment, you also have things like pollution, for example, right? On the S, you also have things like employee welfare, right? Consumer welfare, and so on. And then on the G, you also have more corporate practices. Now, why is that important to me, or how have I applied it in my projects? Is that you see corporations traditionally, or when you Google, right, sustainability strategy, a lot has been focused on climate. And I think that's for a right so, because we have a big issue on climate. However, when you deep dive into certain businesses, let me give you the example of the radiology business, because radiology is also closer to my heart as a recent project that I've done. You dig deeper and you realize that actually radiology, by the nature of the business, has a big impact on pollution, for example. Let's use it as a simple example for now. Let's stop here. Of course, it's much more than just pollution. But if radiology would, for example, only focus on climate and not tackle pollution, it will not solve its direct biggest impact. So why I think it's important then that companies become aware what is also their impact besides, right, the bigger scheme, and really focus and do well in that. I think it's very important, because within the bigger corporation, of course, the target can be climate, and of course that can be tackled by parts of the business, but there has to also be that the biggest impact is also being tackled and not neglected, which is why I think not forgetting, like Harry mentioned, the S part, right, this inequality, things that are maybe not so present unless you have operations, for example, in low and medium income countries. Maybe focus more on E if you have operations in Europe. But this is such an important topic to not be forgotten, in my opinion. So hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Alba.
Yeah, so I mean, just to add to the list that JJ and Hattie gave, I mean, I think, of course, climate change, income inequality, biodiversity, the fragility of our democracies are all huge issues. But I think they're all just sort of symptoms of this kind of growth at all costs, system and economy that we've built. So I think it's also important for people to zoom out and have those conversations as to, okay, how do we get to a livable and safe future for everybody? And what does that look like, right? Because otherwise we risk just trying to plug one hole with another, and we have different band-aid solutions, but rather kind of having those kinds of conversations of what, can we be doing together better to create that kind of future. So I know that's a very high level statement, but I think good to keep the big picture in mind.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, it was a very subjective question, so really nice to hear your various answers. So I am also curious if you have any examples of companies or individuals who really manage, in your opinion, to integrate this kind of purpose-driven mentality into their work. And this is something for the audience to kind of seek inspiration from. Any companies that have good examples, or maybe not so good examples as well, that's allowed, or maybe individuals that you would recommend that they follow?
Sure, maybe I can give a shout out to the True Price Foundation. So I don't know if you guys are aware of the concept of True Price, but it's an organization that was founded by Michel Scholte and Adrian de Groot Ruiz. And essentially what they tried to do is they tried to calculate the externalities of products. So, the price that we pay at the shop for a carrot or a bag of potato chips often doesn't include all of the negative externalities, the social impacts, let's say not paying workers the right amount for a livable wage, or the climate impacts of that product. So they've developed a methodology that looks at what should be the true all-encompassing price of a product that would be a fair price to pay. So I think they're doing quite groundbreaking work here in the Netherlands.
Maybe just building on that, one person that I personally admire is Paul Pullman. So some of you may know Paul Pullman used to be the CEO of Unilever, and he did a lot of smart things at Unilever back when in his tenure. And I think he's a very inspiring person. I think he even wrote a book about how to basically become net positive as a company. And I think that's a great starting point to build a bit of understanding of that. And then obviously the more known, at least in the news, example that I also quite admire is Patagonia. There I'm not so into the details, but Patagonia, right, from donating their profits to the CSR work that they've been doing, I think it's pretty cool.
Mm. Maybe I would like to say something about, let's say, the sort of more social movements and NGOs, right? I wouldn't mention one specifically because I do think they all have a role to play. So in the sector I work, you have more activist organizations that maybe chain themselves to a fence and what you have. You have other organizations, maybe like WF, who are in conversation with companies and governments to establish, frameworks and policies and what you have. I think they both have a role to play and they need each other. So we need activists to put pressure, and we need also scientists who come up with evidence about impact of corporate practices. And then we need organizations that then sit with them and have the capacity and the experts to come to agreements and better policies. So I think we all need them. So I wouldn't mention one. What I would say is that for the people that are sort of listening to this, is that try to find an organization that really fits with what you believe is important and where you think you would like to contribute to. I think that is important, where you feel comfortable with and what you think is key for this change. So I instead of mentioning one, just saying there is a diverse of organizations that have purposes and they will have a role to play.
Okay, thank you so much. And I see just now one question from the audience that also kind of leans into the topic I have prepared, but I'll just read the question from Femke. Do you have any advice to recent graduates that are seeking an impactful career but run into barriers such as few entry-level positions in impact-driven organizations? So really nice, concrete question from Femke.
Maybe, Femke, one perspective that may come a bit as contradictory, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind, so I'm just going to say it, is for me, if things come too easy, sometimes the challenge is not fun enough. So what I'm trying to say with that is it could be quite fun as well. If you see right now, right, at this point in time, you want to enter the workforce, you see that there's no opportunities in your desired company, but there is another company where you see a lot of potential to change, right? I'm not saying join now an oil and gas company, but join a company where you really believe that the industry could transition. There's a lot of room to change, right? For example, energy industry, I think it's super exciting at the moment. And then join a position where from that position, you can really make an impact, because that may be even more rewarding. At least that would be my advice. Look also at those that actually need to change and where if you make it happen, you can really help a lot of people and society at large. First thing that comes to mind. I can think more and build on that.
Now, for me, two things. I do think it's important that you can show what is your motivation and what are your principles. I think that weighs when you apply for NGO. So it also weighs in that sense if you have done voluntary work, if you have been joining certain networks, if you are aware of certain developments, if you can share some of those experiences, even if they are not working experience, but let's say more voluntary. I think that matters. And a second thing I want to mention is if you would aspire to be an NGO, I mean, we also do need skills. We do need investors. We do need people that know things about communication. So it's also, if it's difficult to get into the sector, and I know it was quite difficult for me also to enter this sector. It's still valuable if you gain experience in another sector, maybe not impact driven, and you can then bring this experience to an organization that's maybe more closer to your principles. That still matters. So I hope this helps.
And maybe just to add to that, if you're not finding the opportunities or the roles that you want to be finding, I think it's a good exercise to think of, where do you see yourself in the future? What is your ideal job? And then looking backwards, who do you need to be in order to get that job? And sometimes the experience is not only through, a full-time job, but maybe it's about doing volunteer work. Maybe it's about upping your skills, doing some free courses on Coursera. We're really building up that profile of that person who will have that job and who you want to be. And that will help you really position yourself so that when that job does come up, that you're just very clearly suited for it.
And just one other thought that comes to my mind is the power of networks, right? Because maybe you're not in that organization today, but there are so many people you can reach via LinkedIn, via alumni networks, via these professional associations we spoke about, and find mentors, find people that are going to fight for you, find people that are going to help you. At least I have such mentors, and they really helped me throughout my career so far a lot, right? And can bring you then to the step forward, or as Alba mentioned, at least give you the nuggets of what you will need to get to the point that you want. And it's okay, you're not here then tomorrow, but you can be here in 2 years. And in the grand scheme of things, you've done a lot of great things until then. So
thank you. That's been really valuable. Does anybody else in the audience have any questions or anything to add? Can be a comment. There is a comment, but it's not a question, from Dennis, that found our call very motivating. So that's really nice to hear. So we will, I think with this, we will slowly move to wrapping up the session. But as a final thing, I would like to ask all of you, of course, we've shared many good practices, many advice already. Is there anything that maybe you forgot to mention or you didn't have a chance to, and you feel like it could really benefit to the audience in terms of, for the ones who are looking to kind of continue their career in an impact-driven organization or just do impact in different ways? What would be your final piece of advice?
I think, actually, just before I joined this session, I was having lunch with a very young colleague, and she told me she had been a marketing manager for a company in Georgia. She was actually being invited to all the Gucci and Chanel events she wished for. She was having a very nice job, and she actually decided to change her work and work for WF at the lowest salary. And the reason was that she felt it was more meaningful and it had impact. What I want to say is actually something I said before. I think try to be brave, try to be true to yourself, but also try to make decisions that are maybe your other students. And that was what my colleague said. The colleagues were like, what are you doing? And a friend said, what are you doing? She made that step, and it meant, changing expectations of other people. It meant being brave. And I would say that to all of you, and try to think about what is important to you, and then be brave in trying to achieve that.
Thank you. That's excellent. Alba?
Yes, I would add to that, because I think that's a great one, is not to give up, because also the participant who asked the question about, how do you get in? I feel like, the world can seem so big, and all these LinkedIn job postings seem infinite, and it's also impersonal. How do I get in, to this organization, when you're getting, generic rejection emails, I guess, when you're applying for these roles, right? But to just not give up, because there is always a way in, and when doors close, then other doors open. So if you just keep pushing at those doors, then they will open eventually.
yeah, and maybe just let's say completing the round on that, I would say you can make an impact anywhere you are, right? It may not be the ideal position today, but you can still make an impact. And I think it's important to not get frustrated easily, something I mentioned at the beginning, and that is that change does not come so easy. Change does not come tomorrow. And the more, let's say, radical, the more crazy ideas that you want to implement, the fewer people you will have to support you on the process. And I think that's okay, because you can build an army from within. And if you start with 2-3 people, right, then you have first success stories, more people will get on board, right? You have the early movers, right? The adoption curve, right? So it's really like that. And I think if you just start small, right, build pilots, start with things that move the needle just a little bit, little by little, you will really make it work. And then with those proof points, you will also gain experience, and you will know even more targeted in the future where to push. So what I'm trying to say is, don't get frustrated, persevere. We're all in this journey, and most importantly, we should reflect on learnings, because if we have this collective intelligence now, for example, in this round, you guys are doing stuff, I'm doing stuff, everyone is doing something, and I think it's important to also not be afraid to ask each other for help, for advice, because in the end, nobody has all the answers. That would be my 2 cents. I ask questions all the time to everyone, and that helps me a lot.
So I really cannot imagine a better way to wrap up this conversation. I think we've said many, many great things. And yeah, I would like to thank everyone for sharing your experience, your ideas, your insight. Thank you so much for the audience as well, to the audience as well. I'm just giving the word now to Erica for the final announcements.
Yes, thank you all so much to our wonderful panelists for this really inspiring session today. Thank you, Meta, for moderating, and to alumni in our audience, thank you for joining us. I hope you found it really inspiring. It would be great to see you again on the last online session at the same time next week. How to use your authenticity to succeed as a leader and to help your team to succeed. Also, if you're in Reach Rotterdam, then it'd be great to see you on the 21st of June on campus. We have an in-person career day sessions being held here. And finally, if you'd like to volunteer your time to give back to the RSM community by sharing your expertise on another topic, then please do get in touch with us. We always love to hear from you. So thank you, everybody, for today, and it's goodbye from us.